This video is a demo of making a blender in Blender. Okay, let's get started. Select the initial cube and we'll delete it. We don't need that. Let's go to Add, Mesh, Cylinder. This will be our Blender container. With the object selected, hit G to grab, and then Z for the Z axis, so it only goes up and down. Let's bring it up a little bit, and then we'll hit S to scale. And what we want to do is just scale it on the Z axis, so we'll hit S and then Z, and that will make it a little taller. And that looks good. Let's right click on the object and shade it smooth. And now let's start working on opening it up. With the object selected, go to edit mode. You can do that by selecting edit mode here or just clicking tab on the keyboard as a shortcut. And then you want to box select, which is a default selection method, just the top vertexes, and then hit S to scale and then bring it out. And that'll kind of give us our shape of our container. We need to open it up now. So we need to take this top face off. Within edit mode, you want to go from vertex select to face select, which is one of these options here. Click on the face you want to delete, hit the delete button, and then confirm just the face. And now if we look in, we have our Blender container. Hit tab to get out of edit mode and go back to object mode. Click on our Blender container, and let's make it a little thicker just in case it needs a little thickness when it's running the simulation with the balls that we're going to be blending in a little bit. We're going to add modifier with the Blender container selected in Blender and select solidify and just make it a little thicker. This will make your shape a little thicker, give it a little more dense thickness there around it. And now let's do a quick preview of it. If we hit F12, we notice the camera is only picking up the bottom piece of it. We can see the camera is pointing down. A quick way to fix that is select and toggle the camera view, and then with the camera selected, open it up and click view, and there's a lock camera to view option, which you can, when you click it, your camera will now follow your view, and then you can position it to be a little bit more where you want it to capture. We're going to look down a little bit, maybe put something like this, and then click this to toggle out. And now if we hit F12, we'll see a different view, more in line with the full object. We do want this to be something we see through, so let's go ahead and create a material. And we won't worry about glass now. We'll go ahead and create a transparent material using the built-in transparent BSDF option. And let's make it just a little bit off-white, maybe something like this. And since we want to see it within the preview in the screen here, we need to do alpha blend so it shows it. And that should be good there. We'll do a quick preview, and there's our new material that we can see through. Now, let's grab our first ball. Go to Add, Mesh, and click UV Sphere. With the UV sphere selected, hit G to grab, Z for the Z axis, so it just goes up and down. Let's bring it up here. Let's right click on it to shade it smooth, and then hit S to scale and make it a little smaller. And now we want to create a new material just for the ball. Let's go to New, under Materials, and let's give it a base color just of kind of red. And then click this viewport shading option to be able to see it. Now, with it selected, we can go over to Move and then grab the blue arrow to move up and down on the Z axis, put it within the Blender container, and we see it sitting there. If we hit F12 for a preview, we can also see it. That looks good. Okay, let's now bring it up and out. Whoops, I selected the container. I have to click again in order to get to the object in it or behind it and bring it up. Now, what we want to do is make sure this operates as a physics simulation. So we need to turn these objects into rigid bodies. as one way of doing it. So we're going to select the first object, our container, and then go to the physics simulation, physics properties, and turn it into a rigid body. And then since we want it to sit there and react to the other objects as they fall in and get blended, we want to turn this from an active rigid body to a passive one. If we don't do that, if we leave it as active and change the collision type to mesh so that we get the best possible simulation, when we run the simulation, we lose our container. It starts to react to the world gravity and starts falling. We want it to react, but not to the gravity, so we'll change that back to passive. Now if we start running it, it doesn't go anywhere for us, but it will collide with other objects that come into it. Let's select our ball now, turn that into a rigid body as well. We're going to leave that as active because we do want it to react and to operate under gravity and be dynamic. And to get the best possible simulation in this particular example, we want to change this to mesh as well. With that selected, we can hit play and the ball will now fall into our container and sit there, and that's it. Great. Now, in order to finish our simulation, we want to, let me just make that a little smaller, like that maybe. We want to add a few more of these. There's a few ways of doing that. I'm going to do it loose just by selecting the object, hitting Shift-D to duplicate, and then just kind of taking the duplicate that's created on top of the original one and moving it over a little bit. And I'm going to hit Shift-D and do it again. I'm going to hit Shift-D over here and do that again. And maybe two more, or a few more. Let's see, Shift-D, Shift-D, Shift-D. I don't know, maybe one more. Okay, now we have more objects and they're all up here. If we hit run now to see what the simulation does, the ball should fall in and be good. Now, in order to blend stuff, that would be kind of boring just to blend a bunch of red balls. Let's select all the balls by box selecting it, hit Shift-D to duplicate again, and then I have a whole new set of balls here. What I want to do is bring these balls right above it, so I'm going to grab them by clicking on G, and then click on Z just to move on the Z axis. Now they'll only go up and down. I'm going to move them right above here, and then I'm going to do that again. Shift-D to duplicate, and then G to grab, Z to go up. And now I have 3 sets of balls. Let's change the material now on the second and third row of balls. Let's create a new material. Let's select new here, and let's make it green. And we'll create one more material for the other set. Make it blue maybe. And now let's assign them. So let's change this from red to green. And now to select all the rest of them in that middle row, you can box select it after you have the first green one selected. And then to change all the rest of them in batch, you hit Control L and then link materials. Select the materials option here. That'll turn all those. And then we can go over to here and change this one to a blue material, and then box select the rest of them. Hit Control L, materials, and now you've got all the balls different colors. If we run the simulation now, all the balls should fall and they kind of bounce in there and stay put. Now I notice that there's red, the green, and the blue. They're pretty much lined up in the rows the way they fell in. What we want to do though is blend them up. So a quick way of doing that is by creating a blender blade down here. Let's switch this to wireframe mode real quick so we can see this a little easier. Let's create a little blade at the bottom. Let's go to Add, Mesh, Sphere, and now we have a new sphere. Let's rotate that sphere on the y-axis, hit R and then Y and then 90 degrees to flip it over. And now let's scale it down. Hit S to scale while we have it selected. Scale it down. And then let's scale it on just this axis here so that we can make it longer. Now I'm going to go to click on Move and then click back on the object to bring it up into our Blender container. And I want it to just sit at the bottom so that any balls that fall down at the bottom can kind of get blended, much like a blender might work. This looks a little too big still. I'm going to scale it down a little bit more, maybe like that, and then bring this out here. All right, that looks pretty good. If we look down, it looks great. And now, with this selected, we can run a simulation again and watch them fall. Nothing happens, and that's because, well, let's first get a preview. Hit F12. That looks pretty good. I think we'll need a little more lighting maybe above it. We'll add that at the end. Okay. Notice they're still red, green, and blue. Nothing's blended up yet. We need this blender blade to work as part of our simulation. So we're going to go to rigid body and we're going to turn it into a passive one. We don't want it falling down or anything. We want it to have a collision shape of mesh so that it does have the best calculation for this particular demonstration. And we want to click animated this time. We want the animation system to control how this thing moves around but have the physics still calculated. With that selected, we now want to spin it around. What we do is we create a keyframe for this at the one spot in the initial part of our simulation, and we add a second keyframe later in the simulation to indicate where we want this to be at that point in time. We'll select the blade, and at the first frame of our simulation, we want to insert a keyframe to say, I want you just like this. Hit I for insert. We don't really care about the location or the scaling because the blade is going to sit right in the middle of the blender and it isn't going to get bigger or smaller, but we do care about the rotation. So we're only going to worry about that for this one here. A new keyframe is selected. Now, we want it to start spinning, but let's see when it should start spinning. If we do 30 frames a second, we hit play here, we can see by the first second or so, the balls are pretty much down there. And so if we tell it to spin maybe for 4 seconds, maybe at about frame 120, that might be good. So we're at frame 120, we'll select our blade, and then we'll go to rotate, and we want to, I'm going to select the item details up here, we want to start spinning this around, and this will kind of simulate the path that it will take. See how the blade's spinning there? It's really our cylinder, but, and up on the top right, you'll see the X-axis, X rotation going, all right, we'll make it 1,001 degrees. Now it hasn't been locked in yet, it's still orange. To do that at frame 120, we're going to hit I again. Again, we only care about the rotation, that's the only part we changed. Once that's locked in, it changes color. And now if we hit back to the start again and then run our simulation, our blade is moving and it is mixing up our walls. Looks pretty good. Just come down a little bit here. The balls are starting to mix up a little bit. And if we hit F12 on a render sample, we see this. It's a little dark, so let's go ahead and grab this light here and hit Shift D to duplicate, get another one, and then let's slide it over, maybe right above here. And let's grab the move here. We'll kind of move it here and bring it up a little bit, maybe. It should give us a little more light on the rendering, and it does. That looks great. Okay, the blades are still, we're already getting some mixing, but it's still not too mixed up. So one thing we can try to do is select the blade. We see that at frame 120, it's gone 1,000 degrees. Let's change it to 1,500 degrees. And let's then lock that in on top of this. What we want to do is go over here, we want to right click and replace keyframes. So that'll take the initial keyframe and update it for us. And let's go back and hit play again and see how that works. Okay, we're not losing any. Oh, we lost a ball right there, but we're not losing any up top. I think we need to do something to our blender shape here. Let's hide this for a second, and let's go in on our blade. Let's see. Okay, so I think we can scale this a little bigger. And let me just put that back for 1 second. Let's get the wireframe and bring this in now. We made it a little bit thicker. Let's make sure it fits within our blender container. Okay, and now let's go ahead and hide this object again for a little bit. Let's create a little bit of a paddle or a blade on our piece here. Let's go back to edit mode, select it and hit tab to go to edit mode. Now we want to create two little paddles on here. So if we insert a loop cut, what we can do is bring that over here, right about here maybe, and then we'll insert another one maybe right about here. That looks good. And now with the loop cut, what we can do is change how this works. So our blender was, what was it doing here? Let's see. Okay, it was moving that way. So we want to cut this piece off like this to give it some more ability to push the balls around. So let's go to edit and we'll go to vertex mode. And maybe what we'll do, we can select how this is going to select the vertexes by clicking on W to rotate around. W now will select like this. So let's see, maybe we'll select these vertexes here. Oh, wait a minute, maybe from here. Maybe like that, and we'll delete, maybe one more. We'll delete these vertexes, and then we want to, let's go back to here. We'll select this one, this outer one here. What we want to do is close this up. We just broke it apart. Let's get to right here. Okay, we have the four vertexes that are going to create the paddle. Let's hit F to fill, and that will fill this face back in for us. And then we want to fill this in too, just so it looks nicer. So we can select these and hit F. Select the vertexes, hit F. And we have these over here as well. Let's see. I'm just going to shift select these. And then hit F to fill that. Now, if we go back out of edit mode into object mode and we render like this, we'll see that the object now has a paddle to it, paddle effect. And so since it's going to be turning, let's do the other side as well. Let's go back to edit mode. And let's see, what do we do here? We did 1, 2, 3, 4. All right, so we did 4 from here. So let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4. So looks like we did these. And how far off here? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, that looks right. Let's delete these vertexes. So we're trying to have a paddle on the other side. That looks great. Let's go ahead and close the paddle face up. I'm just gonna grab these 4 vertexes, whoops, and hit F to fill. And then let's close this up too. So we want to grab these vertexes here, including that one, hit F to fill. And then over here, let's grab these vertexes, just box select them, just the ones that are going to participate in closing this up. Now, if we hit F, everything in between these vertexes will be connected with a face. Now if we scroll out and look around, we have a pretty mean looking paddle now. Let's go back to object mode and unhide our Blender container. Let's go back to the shading mode here. Looks pretty good. Let's see if that does any better for us at blending. So we're at the beginning of the simulation. Let's, whoops, I hit backwards. Let's run it and see. The balls seem to be bouncing much better now. Yeah, we're getting a much better effect here. And I'll just pause it real quick. Hit F12. That looks great. And so what did we had it running to, let's see, we click our Blender blade, we had it running and stopping here. So if we run it a little more, this will be the end of it. And it looks like we might be able to make it run a little faster. So when we're here on the Blender blade, we have 1500 degrees of full rotation. Let's change that to 1700 and rerun the simulation and see if we get away with that. We're getting a little more bouncing of the balls, and hopefully some mixing of them. It does look better. I think we can go just a little bit farther on that. We don't want to go too far because it will, I'm going to replace that, it will potentially bounce them right out of there. Right out the top, like that. That's not at the top, but let's go back to the 1700 because I think, oops, we want to go over to here, make sure we're on this keyframe that we want to update and go ahead and turn that back to 1700 and replace it. And also, whoops, that's good. Whoops, replace it. I hit Control Z, there we go. And then I think these balls are just a little too big. All right, we got the light in there. We don't want to select that. Okay, and let's just scale them down just a little bit. Okay. All right, and that's our simulation. There's your Blender. Please leave any comments or questions down below. And thanks for watching. Here's our fully rendered Blender again.